Coming up next, how a guitar-playing welder and his fishing buddy gave a lyrical makeover to a cheesy instrumental and transformed it into one of the coolest songs of the 60s. Then in a totally different band with the same members, the singer gave it a rock renovation, turning the saxophone solo into a guitar classic that lit up classic rock radio with a southern fried twist. Great story of this song is coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever had one of those dual cassette decks so that you could record your friends' albums, you're going to love this channel. Make sure that you subscribe below right now so you never miss out on our daily episodes. You're also going to want to check out our Patreon. We have a brand new show that's starting there this week. It's really cool. And make sure to catch our next ARP Live. It's on Top Gun, the soundtrack. Great scorching soundtrack of the 80s. We got Kenny Loggins, Terry Nunn from Berlin, Mike Reno, a Loverboy. It's going to be great. You can sign up by clicking on the link below. It's free to sign up. It's time for another edition of our series, Number One in Our Hearts. This is where we break down a song that should have been at the top of the Billboard Hot 100, but due to different circumstances, it fell a little bit short. Today, we cover a song that's so classic, the band was named after the word. One of the coolest pop hits of the 60s and the 70s, Spooky by the Classics 4 and Atlanta Rhythm Section. Now this song was originally recorded as an instrumental, and it was a moderate regional hit in the Atlanta, Georgia area. It was composed by the Georgia-based duo of saxophonist Mike Shapiro-Sharp and pianist Harry Middlebrooks. That was in 1967. Now, as an instrumental, Spooky didn't make a whole lot of noise outside of the American Southeast. It stalled at number 57 on the Billboard Hot 100. But the track's catching melody caught the imagination of a young welder and guitarist named J.R. Cobb. Cobb went to his fishing buddy and his songwriting partner, Buddy Bowie, with the idea of putting lyrics to this particular track and turning the sax instrumental into a pop song.
Love is kind of crazy with a spooky little girl like you.
Now, in the early 60s, Cobb was a pretty darn good player that was largely unknown beyond the local bar scene in Atlanta before he joined the Classics, later renamed the Classics 4. On the other hand, Buddy Bowie, he was a colorful good old boy that quickly made a name for himself in the music business. He was a songwriter, a band manager, a producer, publisher, record label executive, concert promoter, and really a virtual ringleader. It was Bowie's lovable Southern charm and his wild ambition that propelled his notoriety as the P.T. Barnum of Southern rock. The story that really exemplifies Buddy Bowie's one-of-a-kind persona was the time that he booked the great Roy Orbison for a concert in Dothan, Alabama. Orbison agreed to do the show that Bowie offered with the caveat that in order to play the show, he needed an orchestra to play with him. Bowie explained to Orbison that they didn't have an orchestra, but he would have a killer backing band called the Webbs that could play all of Roy's music. Roy arrived to play the concert, and when he joined the band for rehearsal, he was stunned by how perfectly they played his songs. Orbison was so blown away by how good the band was, he wanted to take them with him on tour, to which Bowie responded, "Roy, you can take the band with you, but you have to take me too." Bowie was then installed as road manager, touring with Orbison and his Bama band around the world, which included gigs with the Beatles at that time. Running scared. Bowie's first brush of success with songwriting came when he wrote the hit tune Party Girl. That was for Tommy Roe in 1964. So J.R. Cobb met Buddy Bowie at the first studio recording session for Classics 4. Their mutual love of fishing and music made them fast friends. In fact, the duo did their best work while angling at their favorite fishing hole near Lake Eufaula on the Georgia-Alabama border. Inside a small fishing trailer owned by Bowie's uncle, with no phone or other distractions, the boys would stay up late working on lyrics. Sometimes they'd write all through the night. Bowie and Cobb wrote 3 enormous hit songs for Classics 4 during those fishing trips. That included Stormy, their their highest charting single Traces, with an assist from Classics 4 bassist Emory Gordon Jr.
Traces of love long ago.
And the group's breakthrough, the number 3 smash, Spooky.
Love is kinda crazy with a spooky little girl like you.
Now, the lyrics to Spooky, they were fashioned with some cool cat vernacular from Bowie and Cobb about a girl who teases her pursuer by playing hard to get. Being in a relationship with this spooky little girl, it's unpredictable, it's puzzling, and mysterious. And she knows the effect that she has on men. In the cool of the evening, when everything is getting kind of groovy, I call you up and ask you if you'd like to go with me and see a movie.
Ask you if you'd like to go with me and see a movie.
First you say no, you got some plans for the night, and then you stop and say, all right.
And then you stop and say, all right.
My favorite lyric from Spooky is actually in verse 3. If you decide someday to stop this little game that you are playing.
Someday to stop this little game that you are playing.
I'm going to tell you all the things my heart's been a-dying to be saying. Just like a ghost, you've been a haunt in my dreams, so I propose on Halloween.
So I propose on Halloween.
Classic 4, they honored the original instrumental version of Spooky with a jazzy saxophone solo in the bridge. The question of who performed the sax solo in Classics 4's Spooky is the subject of serious debate. Several musicians have claimed to have done those honors. Classics 4 biographer Joe Glickman stated it was none other than Mike Shapiro, the man who co-wrote the original instrumental of Spooky. Glickman added that the reason Shapiro didn't play on any other Classics 4 songs is because he was difficult to work with in the studio. Shapiro and Bowie, who was managing the band, they butted heads over how the solos should be executed. Shapiro wanted to be more freeform jazz, while Bowie dictated a mainstream pop approach. In the final recording of Spooky, there's a tone break at the end of the 34-second solo, which Shapiro insisted on redoing. But Bowie refused, and that was that. The lead vocals, they were performed by the vastly underrated Dennis Yost, who actually started off as the band's drummer before his Classics 4 bandmates discovered his unique torchy rasp. During the first wave of live shows, Yost sang lead while playing the drums standing up. They brought in Kim Venable to play drums so that, Yost could move to the front of the stage. And despite garnering 3 top 5 hits that each sold over 1 million units by 1970, Yost was the only remaining original member of Classics 4. They changed the name of the act to Dennis Yost and the Classic 4 and had, I believe, one final top 40 hit that was in 72. Another Bowie and Cobb creation called What Am I Crying For? That peaked at number 39.
So what am I crying for?
In 1975, Yost disbanded the group, and shortly after, he left the business altogether. He did return to music a few years later and called his act the Classics 1. Since he had lost the rights to the Classics 4 moniker. Yost fought really hard to get the rights back to Classics 4, and he was inducted into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame in 1995. Meanwhile, when Classics 4 began to fizzle, Bowie had a vision of assembling a new band that he could produce, manage, and write songs for. It was Bowie's dream to build a supergroup that featured the finest musicians in the South to be the vehicle for songs that he composed. Once again, Bowie hooked up with his pal J.R. Cobb, and he recruited some other ex-Classics 4 members. There's Robert Nix and Dean Daughtry, along with coveted studio musician Paul Goddard to play bass, and another toured session man, Barry Bailey, as lead guitarist. From there, they formed Atlanta Rhythm Section. Buddy Bowie, who was, of course, a proficient musician himself, he also contributed backing vocals on several cuts on Underdog, including the lead single from the album, the number 19 hit Do It or Die.
Don't you know that you should know that?
The original lead singer for Atlanta Rhythm Section, or ARS for short, was Rodney Justo. But he didn't stick around very long. He departed just after the release of the band's first album in '72. After Justo left, Buddy Bowie once again demonstrated his gift for identifying diamonds in the rough, and he discovered Ronnie Hammond. Hammond was working as a sound engineer at the famed Doraville recording studios when Bowie heard him sing, and he hired him to fill the vacancy as the new lead vocalist for Atlanta Rhythm Section. This was a bold move for sure, but Hammond proved to be a natural, emerging as a consummate frontman for ARS. Now, although they didn't achieve the level of success of other Southern rockers like Leonard Skinner, 38 Special, ZZ Top, or the Allman Brothers, ARS had a great run of success from 74 through 81. 7 ARS singles broke the top 40, including a pair of number 7 hits, So Into You, great song. I'm so into you. An Imaginary Lover. ARS was actually called the Steely Dan of the South because their albums sounded so good, so smooth. Steely Dan's Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, of course, hired the best studio musicians to achieve artistic perfection in the studio. But the Atlanta Rhythm Section, they were loaded with incredible players that were the core of the band, anchored by Cobb and Daughtry. Buddy Bowie and Cobb always believed that Spooky could be reconstructed into a rousing rocker. So when ARS began working on material for their 8th studio record, Underdog, the old fishing cronies decided it was time to resurrect Spooky with an ARS overhaul. Cobb and Goddard Southern fried the original rhythm of the song. Barry Bailey replaced the sax solo on Classics 4 version with 2 just blistering guitar solos, featuring some really cool descending triplets in his second solo. And how about that spirited Dean Daughtry keyboard solo on the ARS remake? Just amazing. I must have listened to those solos 1,000 times. They're just spellbinding. The ARS version of Spooky was released as the second single from Underdog, and it returned the song to pop prominence, ascending to number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100. Perhaps more importantly, the ARS reimagined Spooky was one of the first hits of the emerging album-oriented rock radio format at the dawn of the 80s. And it has evolved into a mainstay at the ensuing classic rock format really over the last 4 decades. Besides the connective musical DNA between the Classics 4 and Atlanta Rhythm Section, there are some interesting and tragic parallels between the 2 men who delivered the lead vocals for the hit versions of Spooky. Dennis Yost and Ronnie Hammond were both unknown commodities when their hidden vocal talents were unveiled. And they really shined in their respective spotlights. Yost inspired many singers in the 60s and early 70s, and Hammond was beloved by his peers. One of the most notable praisers was Skinner's frontman Ronnie Van Zant, who called Hammond the best singer he'd ever heard. When the popularity of their respective groups died out, Yost and Hammond pursued non-musical interests. Yost chose an uncharacteristic combo of fishing and flooring, while Hammond immersed himself in carpentry. He built several homes in the Georgia area. Now, in 2001, Yost had throat surgery, and he recuperated to do more performing on the oldies circuit for a few years afterwards. But in 2006, Dennis fell down a flight of stairs, and he suffered serious brain trauma, and his health steadily deteriorated. In 2008, coinciding with the 40th anniversary of the entrance of Stormy onto the Billboard Hot 100, Dennis passed away from respiratory failure at just 65. Ronnie Hammond also dealt with post-stardom blues. In the late 90s, Hammond was in a bad way. Around Christmas time in about 1998, Hammond had gone through a difficult divorce. He was diagnosed with clinical depression and struggled mightily with alcoholism. He was living alone in a small rental house in South Georgia. And after a 4-day drinking binge, Ronnie slit his wrist with a steak knife. The police were called by a neighbor, and when they arrived on the scene, Hammond was uncooperative, and he rushed the responding officers in a drunken rage with an apparent death wish, brandishing a hammer in one hand and an electric guitar neck in the other. In self-defense, one of the policemen shot Hammond in the stomach, and he dropped to the floor. He was rushed to a hospital, and he miraculously survived the near-fatal clash. In 2011, though, Ronnie passed away from heart failure at 60 years of age.
You have to go on and do it all night.
Now, J.R. Cobb left ARS in the late 80s, but he stayed busy with a number of music projects and live performances. Cobb toured with the country supergroup The Highwaymen. You remember that included Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, and Willie Nelson. Cobb was actually inducted into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame in '93 and the Alabama Music Hall of Fame in '97, where he received the Music Creators Award. JR died of a heart attack just a couple of years ago. As for his spooky writing partner, Buddy Bowie, he met the same demise, succumbing to a fatal heart attack 4 years earlier in 2015. As the 80s began, Buddy, always the impresario, with many irons in the fire, he released the novelty hit Pac-Man Fever by Jingle Rider Klein's Buckner and Garcia on his record label BGO. Buddy became part of the Nashville music community later in the 80s, where he wrote songs for Wynonna Judd, Garth Brooks, and Travis Tritt, among others. Like Cobb, Bowie was inducted into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame and the Alabama Music Hall of Fame in 1984 and 1997, respectively. It didn't matter whether you were in Georgia, Alabama, or anywhere else in the United States, though. If you mentioned Buddy's name, people lit up. He was a beloved, fun-loving character who had a full life that revolved around his passion for music and for people. Spooky, being the classic pop song that it is, has been covered many times. There's the version by Dusty Springfield, the Velvet Monkeys.
Love is kinda crazy with a spooky little boy like you. Love is kinda crazy with a spooky little girl like you.
Imogen Heap, and Daniel Ash. Probably the most pertinent remake of Spooky is the smooth jazz version by David Sanborn that's really faithful to the Mike Shapiro original alto sax instrumental back in 1966. The music that began the spooky legacy that will really go on forever. This song has been a fixture in my life since I can remember. Of course, it was busted out every single Halloween. The song has always been strangely comforting for me. I think it started when my dad used to sing it all the time whenever it came on the oldies station in the car. Both the Classics 4 and Dusty Springfield versions were played on the oldies station there. And then it'd come on the classic rock station, ARS would blast out. And my dad always had this funny thing that he'd do where he'd sing the lyrics and jab me, spooky, try to get me to sing along. I just laugh and say, Dad, you always do this whenever this song comes on. He's always being like, spooky. When I go to sleep at night, I always listen to music. It just helps me get calmed down. And I have this playlist that I've named Sleep Well. And this song, both the Classics 4 and ARS versions are included. It just calms me down and transports me to a simpler time. The other day it came on while I was driving with my boys, and I started doing exactly what my dad did to me, singing it to my boys and kind of goading them to sing along. My son started laughing and said, Dad, you always do this whenever these songs come on. I thought, some things never change. Make sure to leave us a comment about this classic song. What is your favorite version? What are your memories of the Classics 4 version, the ARS versions? Let us know below. If you like our content, we do invite you to be a subscriber by clicking on the link below, and make sure to click on the box so you never miss out on our daily interviews and videos. Make sure to check us out on Patreon as well for more videos. Help us keep the music alive. That's what it's all about. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth.